This is an inscription I worked on a number of years ago. It comes from Roman Naissus, and it consists of two fragments that you see on your screens, or at least I hope you do. These two fragments were spotted early in the 20th century within the structure of a wall in the fortress of Nice, where they had been reused as building blocks. They stood, as Nikola Vulic, the first publisher of these fragments, tells us, not far away from one another, with their lettering considerably blotted out by age. Already bad enough, this condition later deteriorated, so much that in 1979, Petar Petrović was unable to revise the inscription or even detect either of the fragments as he worked on the fourth volume of the IMS. So he could do no better than reproduce Vulic's facsimile, which now seems to be the only record of the text to work with. The obvious observation is that this inscription is a funerary one, whose dedicatee, by the name of Aurelius Bancio, or Bancius, or Banus, died a young man. In fragment B, line 1, we read Juvenci. In B2, we read Juvenis, with some further details implying an early death. In A3, we read miserand, which obviously means poor or deplorable. In A5, where Vulic supplied ereptus, which means snatched away, and also thought of perentus or interrentus, perished. Then the mention of a spouse late in the text, at B7, here, conus. All this makes it fairly certain that the deceased was young, had a wife who seems to be the dedicator, or one of the dedicators of the inscription. At A2, Vulic proposed in nocus. We may supply in nocus vixit, or in nocus vixit, in view of a number of funerary texts in which the phrase in nocum vivere is used to evoke an untimely death. The epitaphs typically ascribe innocuousness rather than innocence to those who count as feeble or frail, not only women, but also males who die before reaching their prime. And there is a further inference based on B4, pessimam gentem, scoundrels, and also B6, gentis periura, the treachery of these people. A further inference, that inference would be that Aurelius Bantio died violently. Funerary texts often speak of death by the hand of latrones. And although our fragments offer no explicit mention of a similar case, the scenario is fairly probable in view of parallels such as CLE 174, which stands on a grave of a 15-year-old, what debuit facere filius, what what the son should have done, Scelesta gens fecit, ut hoc faceret pater. So the words gentis per iura replicate a poetic phrase coined by Virgil and copied by others. The possibility of supplying the chapter at B1 here further enhances the picture of a young man murdered by bandits. Aurelius Bantio may, in fact, have been deceptus a latronibus. In the epitaphs, deceptus often means frustrated by fate, and is particularly salient in a number of inscriptions, which tells us of people being deceived by bandits, that is, killed by them in a brutal or cowardly manner. A final observation at this stage would be that at several points, our fragments exhibit traces of dactylic meter. At A2, we read in nocus vixit. At A3, miserandus, or the like. At B1, decepta juventi. At B2, juvenis qui. At B6, gentis per iura or per iuria. This certainly looks like fragments of verse, but the poor state of the text makes it uncertain whether the inscription was intended as a proper carmen sepulcrale, or not. Now, a closer examination of the facsimile reveals that at 2 points, at A2, the words innocuous, and at B4, the word gentem, as supplied already by Vulic, can actually be read almost in their entirety if the two fragments are drawn close together with fragment B on the left-hand side of the picture. So these are the two facsimiles replaced. On the left side now you can see the fragment B. Or the text now becomes possible. Decepta juvencli. Obviously, it's not the beginning of the text seems lost. The words decepta juvencli means the deceived, and now there's a missing noun, of a youth, a young man. Aurelii Vantionis juvens, the young Aurelius Bantio. Qui innocuus vixit, annus viginti, dilectus, who for 20 years lived harmlessly and was beloved. Qui miserandus, this poor man, this poor youngster. A pessimam gentem, perentus, killed by scoundrels, quietus dum restaret, as he stood inoffensively. And now there's an colophon. Neque gentis per iuria or per iura penam, neither the treachery of these people, neque flicta coniuns neque amici, nor his distressed wife and friends, quantum nefas videre parentes, ever saw that greater punishment as great is the wrong that his parents saw done to them. Details. The lost beginning of the inscription appears to have contained some conventional opening. It could have been Unc titulum posui, or feci, or posuit, or fecit. Mater decepta juventli, or genetrix decepta juventli. However, the mention of a dedicator, though possible, should not be considered necessary at this point, seeing that the dedicators do appear later in the text. On the other hand, the general picture of a young man killed by bandits emerges more clearly if we persist in taking decepta to refer to the deceased, in which case virtus decepta juventli would be a possibility. Qui vixit annos vinti dilectus. 20 years of age, based on our previous assumption, is just about what we may expect for the deceased. And there is the predicative use of dilectus. This is well attested in Roman epitaphs. There's a parallel in one of the epigrams in Bucela in the CLE of a young woman, vixit dilecta marito. She lived beloved, she was beloved by pessimam gentem perentus. Lines 4, 5. The accusative after ab, instead of the ablative, is a well-attested feature of Vulgar Latin. But the occurrence of gens, in the sense of men, people, is noteworthy. Instances of such use are not very frequent before very late Latin, or we should rather say early medieval Latin. Perentus typically describes a sudden and violent death. Dum restaret in lines 4 to 5. The incident that led to the death of Aurelius Bantier initially may have resembled the typical encounter with street robbers, as described by Juvenal. Stat contra, starique jubet. He stands in front of you and tells you to freeze, with the victim seemingly trying to handle the situation with as much common sense as he could gather. Quietus is the key word. On the one hand, it means one who remains aside of the fight, not taking part in a violent conflict. On the other, quietus is the peaceful citizen, warmly praised and fundamentally helpless, as the species usually is. Lines 5 to 8, the final part of the inscription. We should take this together for the reasons which will become clear later. Neque gentis per iura penam, neque flicta conius, neque amici, quantum nefas videre parentes. Vulgar for periuria, treachery. It would then be a phonetic process, close to what became parete in Italian, from the Latin pariete. By the way, the word appears in an epitaph already in the ancient city of Rome, in a Latin epitaph in the form paretes, without the I, without the vulgar yod, which tended to disappear in such phonetic contexts. So periura may be periuria. An alternative explanation would be that gentis periura would have periura as an adjective and then gentis as a nominative singular, the treacherous kind, gens periura. That would be then a case of the so-called isosyllabism, which is a vulgar phenomenon, well known but still unparalleled with this particular noun, with gens. This is where we have the anacolthon, and the English translation I propose reflects that. This is a notable detail, and I shall try to draw some conclusion later on from this. Now, we have already seen that this inscription, IMS 4.39, contains fragments of verse. But now that I have proposed another reading, this list needs revision. The text, as we read it, exhibits 3 hexameter endings. Recepta juventli in line 1. Gentis periuria penum in line 6. In fact, this is more than an ending. This is the latter half of an hexameter. Gentis periuria penum. The same goes for nefas videre parentes in line 8. In line 5, peremptus may be another hexameter ending. Besides, further dactylic sequences are found in the words qui nocus vixit and qui miserandus. With scansion, I have not done that, so I shall repeat myself. Decepta juventli, gentis periuria penam, nefas videre parentus as it stands, qui nocus vixit, qui miserandus. Perhaps now it sounds more like pieces of lost hexameters. So, without being a proper carmen in its present state, this inscription, this epitaph, certainly qualifies as a chromaticon. Fragments of verse that are characteristic of this type of inscription are principally due to the fact that many writers of funerary texts relied on expressions and phrases borrowed from both verse inscriptions and high poetry. This is why the presence of verse fragments in an epigraphic text does not prove that a verse inscription was intended. But in this case, there is something more. The analysis of the final section of IMS 4.39 led us to the assumption that there had been a version prior to what became the final text. Another similar clue is maybe found in line 1 to 2, where juventli is immediately taken up by Aureli Vansionis Juvent. It looks as if the original impersonal expression, a youngster, was subsequently personalized by the addition of a phrase which had better been substituted for it, a young Aurelius Bantier. Instances of later intervention in the text. Together with the relatively many fragments of verse, shed a new light on IMS 4.39. To give an explanation of what I didn't explain enough, that is, the second segment, which is critical to my explanation. One from line 5 to 8 here. So this anacolphon, what is there? Of those three final segments, neque gentis periura penam, neque ficta conius neque amici, quantum nefas videre parentes. Now, of those three final segments, the first and the last connect smoothly. You see, neque gentis periura penam, quantum nefas videre parentes. The treachery of these people never saw that greater punishment as great is the wrong that his parents saw done to them. The second segment, however, hardly fits into the sentence. Neque flicta coniuns neque amici. Neither those people's treachery ever saw that greater punishment, nor his distressed wives and friends, and then the following. So this, nor his distressed wife and friends, neque flicta coniuns neque amici, looks like the result of an afterthought, as if the text had originally been written on behalf of the sole parents of the deceased. It is only later that it was expanded to include a mention of his widowed wife and his friends. But even this was done sparingly, so that instead of recasting the sentence, a few words were burdened with too much to say. At any rate, it was insisted that neither the punishment of the perpetrators nor the painful experience of the victim's wife or friends could ever equal his parents' agony. And there is a zeugma on the word penam. The perpetrator's pena is their punishment, but the pena experienced by the survivors of the attack is the pain, the maltreatment they suffer. So this was the explanation I omitted when I referred to two different sections telling us that this may be a case of multiple redaction. One instance, Juvently at the beginning, and the other instance, the middle part of the final sentence. Those seem to be later intervention into the text, and they, together with relatively many fragments of verse, shed a new light on the inscription. If there was a text prior to the one we read, was it a Carmen? This question leads us to view the inscription as a possible, not a proven, but a possible case of a multiple redaction. However, even if we assume that the actual text was produced by this figuring an original Carmen, this would be the actual meaning of multiple redaction in this case. We cannot hope to restore this Carmen in any detail. It may have been restrained, as good funerary poetry often is. It may have produced a stylish picture of someone's brutality and someone's grief. But what the dedicators wanted instead was their own sad story told in a few words. And as they struggled their way from the impersonal to the intimate, the Carmen they were tampering with ended up shattered like a mirror. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. Does anyone have a question?
Okay, I would like just to make a short comment. First of all, thank you, Vojin, for the wonderful lecture. We are gathered here in Skopje together with the students from archaeology and other institutes, and we listened to your lecture very carefully. It was very exciting. And my question would be, do you know of similar inscriptions with similar content in Serbia or elsewhere? Something with which we could compare this inscription.
Well, I couldn't mention now any precise location, but as far as the death by the hand of the ladrones, or the brigands, is concerned, yes, this even represents locus communis in the epitaphs. There is a class of epitaphs that gives details about the death. Sometimes even details, unpleasant details. This is not a particularly unpleasant case, and the latrones indeed appear in many epitaphs. So yes, the parallels are there, and well, I can give them easily, but this is not the occasion. Those are letters and numbers. So I can write them down and send them to anyone interested. Thank you for the question. And thank you for being there to listen to this lecture. It means a lot to us. And we have many other concerns these days. And it's a noble distraction to be here with you.
Anyone else has something to add or ask? If not,
I really have nothing to add to this exhaustive and interesting presentation. I just like to say thank you for the interesting lecture, and we were glad to participate in this event, inter alias res. that might be happening.
Thank you, Miko.
Thank you all for following. I think we can conclude this lecture and announce the next one, which will be held in Skopje. And stay tuned with Prometheus project and all our activities. So bye.